Hello everyone and welcome back to the next lecture where I'll be talking about macros. And you might have heard me use the phrase macros before. It's just a kind of node type, or it's kind of a macro is all the nodes you can create using the tab menu actually. There are some tuple tools as well, but most of these guys are macros or just some kind of internal nodes. And a macro it's kind of like your custom node which you can create and you can customize and actually make it available using this tab menu, and you can share it for other users to use it if they have the same resource folder path and all that. So we will be starting with a very basic macro, and then we will be refining a few ones of these. Especially we'll work on the AOV create one. We will make actually a macro out of this, and not really a macro, but we will create a nice user interface for the turntable controller. This is not exactly a macro because we will not be exporting this as a macro, but it will definitely lay down the groundwork for a proper macro. But before we do all this, I just want to create a very basic example just to show you what a macro can be and what you can do with that. So I'll just create a dot node somewhere in here, and I'll just make this display as dot disable. Actually, instead of using a dot, which you can still do, I'm just used to always use a group node. It's just it doesn't have this button and all that. So normally within a group you will do lot of things in it, and that's why you would use a group. For the basic example right now, I'm pretty sure a dot node will work just fine. So because we don't want anything in it, we can just use it actually. So let's just say we use this dot node to maybe colorize a number of selected nodes, or we can do just create a node type which we want. So let's say we create a button and say camera create. It doesn't make sense, but it's just an idea there to see how it kind of works. Let's say create PC, which is a primitive, or let's call this create a primitive. Let's hook this up. It doesn't need to be, I just like having stuff connected. View from this node, and what you can do now, hit the little wrench icon on the top right in your parameters panel, edit user interface, and now all we want to do is we just want to create a button. And right now the default is new parameter. Hit the wrench on the new parameter you created, rename it, and let's just call it create PC, and it will create an underscore for us automatically. It should have done that, I think. Just refresh. Maybe it didn't do it. Not sure. Oh, that's the adjustive options name, I guess. Button text is not yet updated. Maybe it's happening now. Still not. I think this is actually a display bug. Maybe just to shift E and E. Maybe finish. There we go. Now we see the button. If I click it, nothing really happens. So edit user parameters, go back to the widget options. And in here now you can actually provide a script to run. And it is actually looking for a Python script in here. So what we can do now, for instance, if I type just print my button, hit OK, and let's see what we get printed in the command line. We can see now that we have these 3 print statements because I clicked the button 3 times. I click it a few more times, and we should somewhere see a few more lines of code. And yeah, that's kind of the basic idea. And obviously we can create more functionality in this button. So let's just go to the parameters and let's just create a primitive. Fairly easy. Let's just go to the widget options and just type a few lines of code. So how it works is you can create any kind of node with the create node function, which lives in the node graph API.create node, and any node type you can create. So let's say we want to create a simple dot. We just type in dot. And a create node expects a root node where the node lives in. So to get the basic root node, we just create a variable called root node, and we type in node graph API again, and just type in get root node and call that function. And in the create node function, comma, root node, and just hit OK. So now we stored that little script within that button. So if I click this now, not really something happens, but if we move up, hopefully you can see now something appeared here out of the blue. That it looks like a dot. So if I delete it and I just click the button again, you can see it appears again. So this is now how you would create a node. And you can give it a position and all that. So if you want to read through the API, lots of nodes have different functions. Most of them have a position. So it's fairly straightforward to just pass in these values and be sure that your node is viewed properly or displayed or like in a correct position. So for instance, if we want to do, or if we want to place a dot at the position where we clicked, so let's say we want to create the dot right where the primitive is, that our dot here, we can just go and query the current node. I think the idea here is to, let's try actually, I haven't tested this before, so let's just do that quickly. If I store the new dot here, what we can do is type in dot, and then we just type in set node position, and then we provide, oh sorry, we actually need to do this not from the dot directly, but from the node graph API. We provide our dot node, and we then provide a position. And a position is defined by x, like 100 for x, and maybe 200 for y. So this would be a valid position, and if we run this now, our dot would be at this coordinate. But let's try to query the create primitive node. And I think what we can do is just type self. Let's just see what if we do print self does. So if I hit OK, and I check my output here, which is right there, if I just have it here, click the button, and we actually get an error for self is not defined. So now we need to figure out a way how to actually query this node, which is calling this function. So let's go back here and figure that out. It's fairly straightforward. We just need, instead of printing self, which you would expect to do, we just print, or we just use node and set, and node is the current node which this where the script lives in. So what we can just do is node.get node position, like that, which will give us the same kind of structure as this here. And if I just cut this and paste it instead of this little tuple here, make a few spaces, and if I just run this now, the dot should be right on top where this current node is. And I did a little issue here. Instead of calling it node get node position, again I did the same mistake as before. We actually need to get node graph API dot get node position instead, and pass in node. So let's try if that works. And now you can see the dot is right on top of this node. So this is kind of how you could do a primitive create, or just a dot, or whatever, very basic things within a Python function call. And obviously right now we are creating a dot, so if you want to create a primitive create, you just type in primitive create, because that's a node type, hit OK, create PC, and now we get the primitive create node. Fairly straightforward. So this would be a basic button, and if we want to create a macro out of this, you have a few options to do so. So first of all, you would go to the wrench and say finish editing user options, and now the primitive create primitive would look like this. Obviously not the best UI, but this is just an example. So I don't like this user thing, so we can actually go back to edit, and if I hit the wrench now, we should be able, oh, you see this only happens in the group, for instance. You can actually remove that user thing. So if I display the group and edit this, you can actually here show user parameters at top level, and if I add a number here and say finish, the user group is gone. So instead of using a dot, maybe you can use a group instead, but nevertheless it's the same idea. So I'll just show you how to, let's just rename this quickly to primitive create tutorial or whatever. So this is just a little node name we give it, and I hit the wrench and say save as macro, and I will actually place it on our desktop. Where we have the rest of the resources. So in the add-ons, which is our resources directory, we have already a macros folder. If you don't have it created, make sure it's capitalized. Go into macros, and all you gotta do now is let's just call or name this create primitive tutorial, and just hit accept, and now that macro should be saved in that location. So if I save my scene now and I close the Katana session and just reopen it, the resource folder should be queried and the content should be loaded. And if I hit tab now and I type create primitive tutorial, you can see now our macro is being created, and I hit edit and you can see it all is right there. So this is the kind of the basic of a macro, and we will be doing a bit more detailed work now on the turntable. But before we do that, let me just delete this, which we just created, in the add-ons, resources, macros, and just get rid of this guy because it's actually just a basic test. Head back to Katana, and now we'll open our lookdev template and we will jump to the turntable controller and make this one a lot nicer. So let's get rid of that. And so what we have in the turntable controller right now, we just have user and we have the duration, and we want to make it a lot more beautiful and use expressions and all that funky stuff. And then we actually can export this as a macro if we want to, but we need to specify an in and out points, and then we always create the camera. So we can do that actually by just creating a macro out of that. Why not? So if I view from here, double clicking the node, and we want to create a few options here. So I hit the wrench, edit user parameters. And the first thing what I want to do is just remove that user thing. So show user parameters at top level, I enable that, and that's done. So the next thing would be to create some top groups, which I like because we have a few options in here. We have our reference spheres. We want to have some control about that to maybe place them a lot better. So right now they live, we can't really move them. We can do that, but that's not the best idea. So let's just create a few groups before we get into this. So one is, we just rename this and we call this one for our reference placement, like that. Then we create another top group and we call this one for camera, to maybe offset this. This is our default render camera position. And let's just create another one for the turntable itself, where we actually drag in our duration then. So this would be the turntable itself. And let me just drag this guy with that little drag handle into the turntable group, which lives now within here. And now in the reference, I want to be able to control the distance of our spheres in Z space. So I'll just create a number slot, rename this, and just call this maybe Z distance, like so, which is a number. Then I want to create a scale value, scale parameter to scale our spheres. I want to create an X and a Y offset. So let's just do that as well. Widget type, as you can see, I created numbers. I renamed this to X offset, and then I create one more number, and this one will be the Y offset. And for the camera, we want to do something a bit more controlled. We want to do a number array, and we want to call this guy translate to translate our camera. And we want to create another one for rotate, number array, rename, and this would be rotate. So now we have options to rotate and translate our camera. And I want to add one more thing, which is we create a number parameter within turntable, rename this, and we just call this for asset rotation, both axes. And what this does, for now it's a number, but I want to change the type instead of being a number to be a checkbox, and now we have this little checkbox here. And these are for now all the parameters I want to create. And now I hit the wrench icon, oh, actually, before we do that, I want to be able to, instead of having these numbers and this weird slider behavior, I want to actually display a slider instead. So I hit the wrench icon again. I go to widget options, and in here I have a few options to control. So I want to display the slider, and I want to have a distance from minimum to maximum 10. So minimum 0, maximum 10, and I want to just do the same on the slider value. Slider maximum, slider center is actually maybe, let's say 1, and I think this is now good. Hit OK, and now we can see we actually have a nice little slider here. Center is at 1, and then we have that. And let's just quickly create sliders for all of these ones. So scale should be almost 0. So let's say 0.01. Drag maximum is, let's say, maybe a scale of 1. We want to display it. Slider minimum is 0.01, and slider center is maybe at 1, and the slider maximum we maybe 0.5, maybe 0.5 for the center, and then 1 here, and hit OK. So now the scale has it. So the minimum is 0.01 and 1, and we do the same for the offsets. Let's do just from positive to negative 10. So that's minus 10, 10, and we want to display it, and slider minimum is minus 10, this one is 0, and maximum is 10. So now we have a slider which ranges like this. And let's create one more slider, rename not rename, widget options, go back to slider. This is the same, minus 10, 10. We want to display the slider, minus 10, 10. Minus 10, 0, and 10. There we go, hit OK, and now we have exactly the same slider. So now we have a very easy way to move our objects with a slider. And now what we can do, hit the wrench icon, finish editing user parameters, and we didn't click the make top parameters, I think. Let's try this again. Edit user parameters, show user parameters at top level, and finish editing. And now we have our groups on the top level, and that looks very beautiful, I must say. So what we gotta do now is we would just need to hook up those expressions to our correct nodes. So we want to control the z distance, and what I mean by that is, if I visualize the camera, which is right there, and my asset, which is in the center, I want to be able to slide the spheres in the z distance. So I have an option to a node here, a T3D node, which we created in an earlier lecture. When I change the uniform scale, my sphere should move in the z distance, and that's the one which I want to hook up that expression to. And it's fairly straightforward. We did that before as well, like how we connect expressions. So I just hit right click, expression, and all I gotta do now is do a reference expression equals the little cap symbol, which means get parent, which goes up a directory. Then we go user, and we still need to type in the user parameter reference, and then we just call this z distance, control and enter, and you can see now this is connected. And if I added my turntable controller now, you can see if I slide it, the sphere moves. Very beautiful and very handy. And the next thing would be to have an option for our scale, just to scale all these parameters uniformly and make sure that we can scale the sphere if we need to. And we would do that in, I think in the global translate, this is the guy we want to change. And now we do an expression again. We do the same thing, equals, cap symbol, / user reference, and scale this time. And now we can see we have the scale working. So if I change my scale, you can see the sphere gets larger. Now we have X and Y offsets, and these ones are these two nodes. So we want to offset the spheres and we want to offset the charts. And this should be also done fairly straightforward. And instead of doing it in here, this is just actually for the internal positioning of the node. So we will be translating it in these two values here. So this actually translates our whole reference package. So in our translation X, we have a we create a reference. We just right click in here, create an expression, open up the drop down, do the same, equals cap / user, and then we type reference, and this would be X offset, and then we just do the same for the Y offset as well. So we can copy the expression, paste it, and rename the X to a Y, and now we have this one in place as well. So let's just go back and actually view from our camera, and let's see if we can actually move the stuff around. So if I go to the turntable controller, the Z distance should visually not change, but the sphere should be moving. You can see now it goes through our asset. So you can see that is definitely moving in Z space. We can scale our spheres together, and we can offset them to the left and to the right and place them wherever we want them in the view. And that's very great and very performant, and that is just fun to work with. The next thing is to hook up our camera to these expressions here. So it's fairly much the same way as we did before. We go to our camera create, and in these little translation boxes we just hook up our connections. So again, very straightforward. Right click, edit expression, and now we just equals cap icon user, and this time we go into the camera group and do translate and .I0, which means first 0 index, so index 0. And if we confirm this, we can see it gets green and is connected. So I'm just copying this, paste as expression, and paste as expression again, but we need to change the I to 1, and we need to change the third I 0 to 3 to 2, so it's 0, 1, and 2. And then we should have all the positions connected, and we just do the same for the rotation. So I'm just pasting as expression again, but this time I'm changing the translate to rotate, and Control A, copy the whole thing, paste as expression again, paste as expression again, and change our index to 1, and for the last one to 2. So now we should have our position connected. So if I move it in here now, we should be able to move this. So if I type in 10, you can see now everything moves as expected. So let me just try a value. Maybe if we go up 5 in Y, we go 30 back in Z, and we can just rotate the x-axis by -10. And I think that is it. And you can specify these values. You can make sliders as well, whatever you want. But this is a way of doing it. So right now we changed the duration and we moved this into the turntable group. So currently our little expression which we have here for asset rotation will not work, and you can see now there's like a red and it's erroring out because that location does not exist anymore. So get parent user duration is not living in that location anymore. So we would need to add a turntable to this like that, and just make sure we do that here as well. Turn table, hit OK, and hopefully, yeah, it's all back in action. And we need to do that again in here. Edit expression, and now we need to do that a few more times. So user dot turn table. I'm just copying this now. So going here, copy, go back to the next one, which is right here, paste turntable.duration, go to the next one, paste it, and one more time right here, hit OK. We don't have the arrow anymore, and everything should be working as expected. So the only thing which we need to do now is I have enabled this little, or added this little option here to asset rotation both axes. It's a checkbox. And what that does, or what the idea behind that is I want to be able to rotate the asset, if optional, it's optional, in two different axes. So one around the x-axis to rotate, and one around the y-axis. So it actually, you can see it from underneath and from all sides. So to be able to do that, I would need to create one for the simple switch, for the simple method when it's this unchecked. And 1, I copy and paste this and edit and rename this and call this maybe both, like it's just both axes. And I would need to control this input based on a switch, creating the switch, hooking it up to the gaffer rotation, clicking the create ports twice, and hooking up our values, right? So, and I just rename the switch to enable both axes switch or whatever. Edit this, and in my value, what I will do now, I will hook this up to that checkbox, to this guy here, asset rotation both axes. So I will use a reference again. So I hit edit on my switch, right click, expression, open this guy up, do equals cap / user dot turntable, and I'm sure I will misspell this now. I think use both axis is not the correct one. So it is asset rotation both axis. The name is not the best, but it doesn't matter. Asset rotation both axis. So just type that in, asset rotation both axis. And now you can see this equals to 0. If I change my value to 1, we should have it to 1, and the switch, it does not update. But if I go back out and back in, or view from below, actually, you can see now the switch is doing what it's supposed to. If I view from here or from one level down, and I change the switch, let's see if it actually does toggle. Yeah, I think this is just a viewing thing, but it actually will do work as expected. If I disable this view from here, you can see the switch is behaving as expected. If I enable that and view again from the next node, you can see it is definitely updating the dimming of it, but the switch is working just fine. So right now our duration is set to 1000 because in our project settings our out time is to 1000. So let's just go back to maybe 100 and view from our camera like that, and maybe view from the render output from down here so we get the correct frustum. And now you can actually see our spheres are not in view anymore. So just for the sake of displaying them nicely, let's just bring them back to 0, 0, so they're on center, move them up to the left, and we are happy with the placement. If it's too large, you can just scale it down, move it a bit more to the left, and now the spheres are in place. So if I scrub now, you can see the asset rotates and nothing really changed. So from 0 to 50 it rotates, but we have both axes enabled, so we would need to be adding a few more things to this expression here. And it gets even more complex, so bear with me on this one. So because we want to rotate both axes, we cannot just divide by 2. We need, this is half, right? So half of our duration is for the Y rotation, but we want it actually to be the half of the half. So instead of dividing it by 2, we want to divide the duration by 4. So if the duration is 100, the first 25 frames will get the Y rotation, and the next ones will get the X rotation. So make sure to change those values to both to 4. So now we're dividing it by 4. And what else we want to do is, because if the value is larger than a certain threshold, we want to specify the rotation has been done already. So what I want to do now here in this guy, I want to create an if else one more time, and all of this should be encompassed in that function call. So what I can do now is, let me just check if this is all right. So yeah, so if the frame is larger than 0, we want to have this value. So it will calculate all of that. And if the frame is larger than 0, we want to just make sure our output is 0 like that, and we want to add the final bracket. So what it's doing now, if the frame is larger than 0, we want to return 360, and if it's not, then we want to calculate this function. So what is happening now, our asset should rotate the full duration now in the first 25 frames. So let's see if that happens. So now we from 0 to we go up till 25, we have a full y rotation. So now we need to add our x rotation, because we wanted after 25 to 50 we want to rotate it in the other axis. So this time we will be editing the z-axis actually, and go to edit expression, and now we need to fill in some values here. So as I said, this is a bit more complicated, and if it's a bit too much logic, I hope you can bear with me on this one. I will just type this out first and then we talk over this. So we have our if else. So if the frame is smaller than get parent dot user dot turntable, like that, and duration. So this is obviously our parameter, our duration, and if it's smaller than the quarter duration, let me just copy this actually, and now I say if it's smaller than that, return 0, and then if it's bigger than that, we do another if else. And in this if else, if the frame is larger than our duration divided by 2, so if it's larger than 50 in this case, then return 360. Or do another little math thing here. So we divide 360 divided by, and we do another bracket, and in this bracket we type our duration again, divide that by 4, so divide the 360 divided by 25, and let me just check if this is all great. So divided by 4, we close the bracket off like that, and we multiply this by our frame number, open up, times frame minus the first frame we have, which is always, because we don't start on 0, we start on 1, so we want to subtract that, get parent, let's just paste it, get parent duration, divide by 4, and if I hit return, let's see what happens, and we have a little error. So let me just check. It says like no attribute user, so I have somewhere, I need my function calls obviously in my get parent node, which I didn't add. So let's just add the function calls, get parent, and open close bracket, and one more time here, and hit enter, and now we get actually something. Hit OK, and now let's see if we get a rotation. So from 0 or from 1 to 25 we get nothing on Z, but then from 25 onwards you can see now we get our rotation going. And that is the whole magic of this little setup. And now whenever we feel like we want to have both rotations on the turntable controller, we can just enable that. Otherwise the rotation goes of half of the duration. If it's on, we have 2 axes rotating, so it's very handy for a turntable tool. So what you can do now, because we want to talk about macros, if I hit save, we can actually make sure that we save this out as a macro. And before we save it out, let's just quickly jump into the edit user parameters. And I don't really like this group icon, so what we can do in the wrench tool, there's toggle group node appearance. If I click that, this node does not look as a group anymore, it looks like a regular node. And the only thing we want to do now is just be sure to clean up your nodes. You can actually add help text to all of these parameters, and I'll just show you quickly a way of adding one. For each parameter you have a wrench icon. You can go to edit help text and just type something in here. Controls the Z distance of the references like that. Hit OK. You can also add hyperlinks, links to the website and whatnot. Hit OK, and we should be good to go. You have a little question mark here which you can click to get the information. You can do several other things like conditional locking, conditional visibility. So if a certain parameter is met, let's say we add a condition. If, for instance, we can now say if that parameter duration contains or is equal to, let's say if it's equal to 100, or actually larger than, greater than or equal to 100, we want to change the visibility or something like that. So if I finish this off, you can see, or we should be able to see that the duration, let's see if it actually did work. Visible options. Oh, why is it not there? Didn't I save it, I guess? Oh, it's in here. So let's see. Visible there. So if the duration is greater than or equal to 100, display this parameter. So this is how it works. So obviously what I'm doing now doesn't make sense, but I just want to show you the functionality. So if I go back to my project settings and I reduce my out time to maybe 90, you can see that that checkbox disappeared because duration is now smaller or smaller than 100. It disappears. So if I go back to 100 for my out time, the checkbox appears again. So this is conditional visibility, and you can do the same to lock certain parameters and whatnot. So I'm just removing this again, hitting OK, and now I just want to click the wrench, finish editing user parameters, and I want to close all these things down like that. Hit save, and now wrench again, save as macro. We are already in the correct, no, we're actually not. So we want to go to desktop like that, go to add-ons, resources, macros, and let's just call this macro turntable controller and hit OK. So the next time we start Katana, we should be able to see that turntable controller. It's not loaded. Oh, it does load it automatically in here. That's very interesting. So now we have this macro here, and you can see now it's exactly as the one we have right there. If I delete it now, delete all this, create the turntable controller node, drag it in, you can see now we have all the stuff back, our main render cameras and all that fancy stuff. We have everything connected as we had it previously. If I view through the camera now, you can see that nothing really changed. My asset still rotates and we still have all the controls. We just want maybe one axis and everything works as expected. So this is kind of a macro which we now created. And now we will be talking about the more advanced macro, which is our, which will be our AOV creation. Right now, this is just a group of these little values here. And for the final part of this lecture, I want to show you a nice way to create a very complex macro, which does quite a few things and is very time consuming to create. So I'll be just creating a few of those parameters. And then as a lecture for you, as a test or whatever, you can work on this yourself, create your AOV create macro, and learn how to set all these things up. So let's jump right into this. Ideally, we want to create a few parameters. So what the AOV create macro should be doing, we should have a list of checkboxes for the AOVs we want to output. And we also want to have an advanced section so we can actually specify our light path expressions. And maybe if we want to have albedo AOVs, which normally you don't really want, but let's just add them. So if I go to my AOV create node, hit the wrench, edit user parameters, and let's just add a parameter and rename this, and let's just call this one diffuse. Like that. It's a number. We want it to be a checkbox like that. And now the idea is now if I enable this, we enable that AOV for this diffuse component, for that diffuse AOV. And let's just for the tutorial's sake, just create one more and be working with these two guys. So let's call this one diffuse indirect like that. And then we create the advanced section, which is another group, and we rename this to advanced. And in here we create a string, actually two strings. One is for the diffuse again, which will be our LPE, and the next one will be the diffuse indirect, which is another string. Rename this to diffuse indirect like so. So these are the things I want to create for this. And let's say we want to also have the option to create this needs to go in the advanced group. If I rename this should be the diffuse albedo. And if this is a checkbox. If this is on, we want to display the diffuse albedo. We want to display that LPE for this. So let's just add one more string, rename this, and call this diffuse albedo, and then LPE, like that. And this should go right below the checkbox. So these are now my parameters, and I only want to display this string if this checkbox is enabled. And the same goes for all the other checkboxes and their values. So change this one to checkbox. And now let's start with the conditional visibility. So in my diffuse albedo, I want to change the visibility if the value is equal to, and then equal to obviously should be diffuse albedo is equal to 1. Hit OK. So if this is 1, this should be displayed. And we do the same for these two boxes. So I go to my diffuse, string, go to conditional visibility, add it condition if it's equal to, and now we go up, show only peers disabled. So we go up two directories, 2 levels. Make sure we choose diffuse, and if that is equal to 1, display that LPE. And we do one more thing for the diffuse indirect visibility options, and we go to is equal to, and we go up 2 levels to the indirect and make sure this is 1. So if I now click finish editing user parameters, we should see a very clean UI. If I click diffuse on, you can see the diffuse pops open here. If I open up the indirect, that opens up, and if I hit that albedo, all these open up as well. So this is exactly what we want. So for the LPE, let's just fill in those LPEs, and I will not go into detail about how you should be typing these things, because you can get all these LPEs from the Arnold section or from your renderer. RenderMan has the same values or very similar ones, so you can just go to their documentation and grab those LPEs and just paste them in here. So this is kind of the basic rib or structure for this macro. What I want to do now is edit user parameters, show user parameters at top level, and toggle group appearance so it's not a group anymore. If I now hit finish, this is a very clean and structured UI. So the next step would be to hook up those expressions, and that is pretty easy done. It's just, it takes a bit of effort to do so. So that's why I will be just doing a few ones, and then we should be done with that as well. So we did already the hard work on that, because we created those AUV output defines and all that. So all we got to do now is create a few switches. So we need at least 3 switches in this. So let's just jump into this node, hit F to frame, and let's just create a switch and move it up here and rename this to my diffuse switch and create 2 ports. One is my scene input location, and then the other one is I have the diffuser copy or just extract this out, move it up here and hook this up. So it goes in here. This one connects up there, and then from the output we go over there, create maybe a dot node for easier placement. Let's just disable the dimming for now. All right, so we got this, and we have a dot here, and we want to connect this guy up and down there. So this is now our little kind of loop of the creation. So this would be the first step, and now what you want to do is we just want to hook up an expression to go to the top level and connect this up. So all we got to do is hit edit, go to expression for that parameter, make a reference expression equals cap / user, and then we just type in diffuse, control enter, and you can see now that is being enabled. So in the diffuse one, currently we have a fixed LPE path, so we want to read it from the top level. So we do another expression down here, expression like that, go in here, and we just do equals cap. I think we need to go up to we need to go to user, and I think we need to go to advanced, advanced like that, dot diffuse, control and enter, and now we see the light path expression is connected up to there. We did some expressions before on these other nodes, I think, for the names. Yeah, we have them here. So let me just copy these expressions and just be sure to paste them in here. Paste expression. Do the same. I think it's always, oh, this is just reading from that. So we can just type this in here. And is equal to name. So that's hooked up. And for the output diffuse, we want to do a similar thing. That is that's the name. And we just want to copy this guy. And that's like that. And paste this on the top here. Paste expression. And this one is another expression, which is equal to the output name. Output name like that. And now that's connected. So all this stuff is now happening automatically, which is great. So now let's just get rid of these guys. And let's just copy and paste all this. So I'm copying this, pasting this down here, connecting it up. So now we have our diffuse indirect, which we still need to define, but copy and paste one more time. Connect these guys up. And now let's just rename everything. So this would be diffuse underscore indirect, and we have diffuse albedo. Diffuse albedo. And let's just hook up these switches, edit the indirect node. This would be diffuse underscore indirect. And this one would be, I think this one does not live in user diffuse, it lives in advanced dot diffuse albedo, and now this one is connected up as well. What we need to do now is rename our nodes. So this one would be diffuse indirect, oops, like that, and change this one more time to indirect. Check if the node names are correct. Diffuse indirect, that's all correct. And we just need to change the path for the LPE to diffuse underscore indirect as well. You can see that is updated automatically. And this one is diffuse underscore albedo. And we have one more albedo to type in here. Albedo, like that. And we can see if everything is updated. It looks good. And looks good too. We just need to change the LPE, which lives under diffuse albedo LPE, if I recall correctly. Yeah, it updated. So this is now the step which we had to do to get all these three nodes working. Just to bring everything in line here, straight lines like that. And now we have the first few switches connected up. And it's a very simple way, and I would encourage you to set it up for all the AOVs you need. So if I go back up a home directory, the AOV create node has now these three things in it. And if I disable them like that, these AOVs are not being created. And right now we are displaying all of them, I think. So if I create maybe diffuse and diffuse indirect, head over to render settings, make sure all is on. And if I render now my garage from the bottom here, you should see that we get those AOVs created. So you can see now we have diffuse and diffuse indirect, which are now being rendered out. It's saving, rendering, and let's just stop the render and check the AOV. So we get diffuse and we get the diffuse indirect, which is almost empty. Really low because we don't have almost no diffuse in there. So let's just enable the albedo, render one more time, maybe change the quality to be medium, re-render, and now you can see that we have the option for the diffuse albedo as well. So as a homework for you, I would ask you guys to create all the rest of the AOVs you need. You can get the LPEs from the Arnold website or the RenderMan website, whatever you work with, and you can feel free to populate this list And in the next lecture, I have this populated, and I will make sure that this file is available, or these macros are available for you as well. So let me just do the final step. Hit Ctrl S to save. Go to, let's say we don't want them enabled on default, or actually let's say we want to have them enabled like that on default. Save this, wrench icon, save as macro. Be sure to go to the correct directory, which is desktop, add-ons, macros, and let's just call this AOV define, like that. Hit OK, go tab, type in AOV define, and we can see now we have the macro already in place. And now whenever you want to share this macro, you can just share this file in the macro folder on your resources structure. So let's just move this guy out of the way, hook these guys up, and now we have actually a macro in place. So this was a rather longer lecture. I hope that is alright. You can I hope you learned something from it, how to create macros, how to use expressions, how to bring it all together to create your own macros. It's a lot to take in for this lecture, but I hope it's worth the content, and I hope it's worth your while. So thank you guys for watching this lecture, and I will see you in the next one.